So we now come to our question period. Now, you can still tweet your questions and go to Facebook. Lars over here is watching the electronic feeds, as it were. Or you can do it the more traditional way by raising your hands, and we'll have some fellows coming through here with the microphones. As we have only really about 12 minutes, really, please keep your questions short and to the point. If it requires a book to give the questions, perhaps you should just publish the book. All right? And remember to speak into the mic because it is being recorded for posterity. All right. Oh, okay, so we go to the Twitter feed right away. Chris, could you get him?
So we have one question for Andrew Little. To what extent do you agree with Jeremy Bentham's assertion in a general view of a complete code of laws that all political power is fiduciary when considering how the courts could recommend to Parliament to reconsider legislation?
So is the question, all political power is fiduciary?
Yes.
All right. So, what do you think about Bentham's position that all political power is fiduciary in the context of?
When considering how the courts could recommend to Parliament to consider legislation.
I'm not sure. I think the... Sorry? Yeah, no, I'll give my summary of Bentham philosophy for a start, and we'll all get home by midnight. Or in my case, we won't get home at all. The point about it is that the traditional role that the courts play is that because they deal with individual cases, they are very good at ensuring that abuses of power, misuses of authority are kept in check. That is very difficult in a system where Parliament can pass laws, and notwithstanding our New Zealand Bill of Rights, that completely overrides it and deprives citizens of the rights and protections that we've said in our 1990 New Zealand Bill of Rights Act they're entitled to. And so this is about, to the extent that the way Parliament functions, MPs don't, every MP doesn't deal in depth with every piece of legislation. And there are a whole range of other considerations why things might slip through the nets. We need another check and balance on it to make sure that in the event that Parliament does make or pass a law that abrogates citizens' rights and freedoms, intentionally or not, that there is somebody outside of Parliament who can kind of wave the flag and say, no, that's a step too far, it doesn't meet the justified limitation test, go back and do it again, either do your homework. And, to some extent it is about creating a political crisis, if you like. Parliament has been told they've got it wrong and they have to go back and do it again. And I think that the dynamic that unleashes will improve lawmaking and stands us a better chance of ensuring that every law that is passed, that we do a better job at ensuring that citizens' rights and freedoms are not traduced.
Thank you. So we go down here in the front.
Hello, for Chris Jones. You've shown how the Welsh, by their success in asymmetrical warfare, got the recognition that the question is not just the rule of law, but whose law. But in the Magna Carta case, it's very much decided by territory, I think. And we still think of laws going with territory very much, so that Magna Carta is called a colonial import or something, because law is not thought to go with people. If it's going to apply, those principles are going to apply to New Zealand, where the markedly distinct populations are very much intermingled in large areas, you have to have a way of getting law that applies to persons. Does the Marcher Law and its role in that have anything to say about the New Zealand situation?
Well, thank you for the question. I'm not sure that I would say it says anything directly. I think you're absolutely right. It is a case in Magna Carta that the law, they are discussing law in specific geographical areas. I think the Marcher Law is actually a very interesting example. It's clearly picked in Magna Carta because it's considered to be neutral ground. between the English and the Welsh. The Marchers are a very odd lot. They don't recognise royal law. In fact, there's a very famous case of this. There is a King's Messenger who arrives with a royal writ in the Marcher lands, and the Marcher Lord's response to this is to make the messenger literally eat the writ and the wax seal, making the point very simply that royal law isn't valid in Marcher lands. And it's rather amorphous. Marcher land does basically depend legally on particular Marcher lords. So there is perhaps something there to think about. I don't think you can, I wouldn't sort of suggest you can extrapolate and transfer principles from the Magna Carta in that sense directly to New Zealand. But possibly, yes, there is something there in the case of the law of the march to consider. It's a rather vague answer, I'm afraid, Michael, but, you know, something.
So we go in the middle here, the fellow in the wine sweatshirt.
I have a question for Mr. Little, but I think before I pose the question, I should give my name because somebody sure want to sue me after this. My name's Peter Newfield. I'm a retired lawyer. I'd like to thank the panellists tonight. I have been to each one of these sessions, and for the first time we've had from all of the speakers intellectual rigour and honesty. Over the last 4 nights we got no rigour and little honesty, so thank you. Mr. Little, my question relates to this idea of having a body that can judge Parliament. Given our very small population, how would we avoid the panel of judges, or however we label them, being appointed politically, so that, as Mr. Obama can tell you who the Democrats are in the Supreme Court, would you be able, best wishes, be able to point out the Labor members of that panel?
I imagine a decision to declare a provision in a statute in contravention of our New Zealand Bill of Rights to then cause it to go back to Parliament would be a decision made by our Supreme Court. I could guess at 1 or 2 of the members of our Supreme Court's political affiliations, but it would be a guess. So I think we have a reasonably good process of appointment of our judiciary, and we have other checks and balances, our Judicial Conduct Commissioner and all those sorts of things. And I think there are moves at the moment to perhaps refine the process. There is always a risk, and clearly we need to avoid it, of politicisation of that appointment process. Consultation between political parties in Parliament before an appointment is made, I think, is useful, and as best as possible, a rational kind of appointments process for the appointment of judges, I think, also helps as well. But I think we've got a pretty good track record in terms of appointment of our judges and the way they've conducted themselves in office.
Could I just make one other point? That is, we are told, I think correctly, that the Bill of Rights keeps on speaking, and it speaks now. What does that mean? What it doesn't mean is that it says what you want it to say. That's another reason why I should congratulate tonight's panel.
So, did you have a question down below? Edward, could you pass him the microphone? Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the panel. I noticed that there has been no mention of national sovereignty with respect to parliamentary sovereignty, because national sovereignty seems to be under threat from a number of different directions. Is there any reason, is there any connection between Magna Carta and national sovereignty?
We're here to bring in justice.
Did you hear me?
I'll attempt to first answer. I think that's a question to all the panellists. is there a relationship between Magna Carta and national sovereignty? Magna Carta dealt with, it was an attempt to restrain the king and provide the start of providing some rights to, at that time, the feudal landowners, and later used to provide rights to citizens. So it was a content, it was kind of a document that's created the content of rights. As to national sovereignty, important as it is constitutionally, I'm not sure the Magna Carta touched on that issue because it was inherent anyway. The king was absolute, and it was the king who was being restrained.
Perhaps I can pick up on that. From an historian's perspective, the answer would be no. Magna Carta predates the concept we would think of as sovereignty by about 100 years. You have to think of Magna Carta as effectively a group of very powerful families arguing with the king, who effectively represents a very powerful family. This is the terms in which people are thinking. The idea of John as a king of England, this is certainly something that's on his seal, but he doesn't think of a nation of England in terms that we would think of that we could apply a concept of sovereignty to. So John's world is a very different one from ours. He also sees himself as a baron in France, where he has powerful interests, and he doesn't really draw a dividing line that we would think of in terms of national sovereignty. So the historian's answer to that would be effectively no. Magna Carta does not really have anything to say in 1215 about national sovereignty.
Thank you. Leading on from that, I apologise first of all as someone who was here on Monday night to Mr Newfield that this question is going to be asked with no rigour and no honesty. But I wonder, this is mostly for Dr Jones, but perhaps also for Mr Riley. I couldn't help being struck when Dr Jones was talking about the Welsh clauses of the fact that I'd been watching the opening session of the Ashes cricket series the other night on Wednesday, and which happens to be taking place in Cardiff, and we were given the very awkward spectacle of having not two but three national anthems being played: the Welsh, the Australian, and then of course the English/British. So my question is whether, given the current rather embarrassing conversation in Britain over nationalism, national identity, and devolution right now, certainly with Scotland, but also with Northern Ireland, with Wales, and indeed with England itself, whether Magna Carta has anything to say to us about these questions of devolution and identity today. Thank you.
Patrick, that sounds like a question that calls for a diplomat's touch.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm glad you've been watching the Ashes, so have I. And long may England's lead continue. On the issue about the debate in the UK, Britain is a multinational state. It's one of the few successful multinational states in the world, and it's been successful for many hundreds of years. And there's always been a very rigorous and vigorous debate in the UK about national identity. And I think it's a debate that we've managed to conduct properly, certainly in the Scottish case, where we had a referendum last year. Not a window was broken in Scotland, although the debate itself was rigorous. And there was a clear outcome that the Scots people chose by a healthy margin to stay within the UK. And I think that debate will continue, and it's part of politics, and it should be done in a constitutional and civilised manner. Can I just pick up on a point that was made earlier, a mention of Jeremy Bentham? Now, I don't know much about Jeremy Bentham, but I think he was the man who coined the phrase, the greatest happiness for the greatest number, as the basis of utilitarianism, which has actually influenced public policy, certainly in the UK, but I think worldwide, more than just about any other philosopher. So a shout out for Jeremy Bentham, and of course he was British, so a double shout out.
Good. All right, I'm afraid I must bring our session now towards a close. But before I do that, there are a number of people whose work in bringing this series together deserves recognition. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to mention everybody by name here who deserves to be mentioned. So bear with me for a moment, because as many of you will know, these events require and involve a lot of people. So firstly, I'd like to thank Jennifer Lees-Marshman and Edward Elder and the rest of our Magna Carta Commemorative Committee. We are halfway through our anniversary celebrations, and we can give ourselves a well-deserved pat in the back so far. Yes, come on. Second, I'd like to thank those of the faculty and then the media productions team who've helped delivering these events. Not only have we had the assistance of many of our student volunteers, like men in the red shirts and so on, who are running around, I'd also single out our event coordinator, Ashley McGarry, who's managed the logistics for this operation seamlessly. Where are you, Ashley? Are you hiding? She's literally hiding. There she is. There, Ashley. Well done. Third, I'd like to thank all of the organizations who sponsored speakers to attend sessions over the week. I'm not going to have time to mention them all. I'll just say we've done this largely without much in the way of a budget at all, and have consequently relied upon contributions and goodwill, and I should say that the goodwill we've had from so many places has been remarkable. Thank you very much. In particular, I'd like to single out the UK Magna Carta Trust, the British High Commission, who from the very get-go were very enthusiastic in supporting us here, the Faculty of Arts, who sponsored tonight's refreshments, which will be happening in a bit, and the display of the 2 oldest known copies of Magna Carta in New Zealand. The display and refreshments will be in the foyer to the left of the doors. Is that right, Ashley? Where's she gone again? Yeah, out to the left here, the refreshments and the 16th century copies of Magna Carta are out there. I'd encourage you all to take in what will likely be a unique opportunity. With respect to that display, I'd like to thank the George Gray Collection of the Auckland Library for making their copy, their 1587 copy available. And I'd also like to recognize the work of Chris Jones here on the panel in getting the University of Canterbury copy up here for tonight's event, and Tracy Thomas for organizing, getting everything together, the cabinet and all that stuff, okay? So, in closing, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to help bring this event together, and please join me once again in thanking our panel.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I may, there is actually one more person to thank, and on behalf of the Magna Carta 800 Committee, I'd like to thank Steve Winter, who's done such a brilliant job.